tested the ability to share?
I haven't. Great idea. Let me test that right now.
If you get the pop-up, you're good.
Okay, and so the answer is it will work. Okay.
Perfect. Perfect. All right, guys, I will go out there. I want to thank everyone for attending this chamber chat. Strategies to protect your business from cyber threats. And I'm Michael Goldstein. I chair the Technology Council and want to welcome everybody to this amazing kind of event. I never like to say amazing about something bad, and I think last week I was watching in a cyber briefing, and they compared the cyber posturing or the cyber breaches of 2020 and 2021 to nuclear proliferation in their times in the 60s, because everybody that we see in the out there as clients, and I'm president of LAN Infotech, IT services company. It's always, I didn't do anything, or what do they want with me? I'm just the one too small firm that's out there. So today we're just going to break things up, and we have a really distinguished panel. I'm happy to say Franklin Zemel. I'll let everybody introduce themselves. Saul, Ewing, Arnstein, Lehr, Stephen Teppler, Mandelbaum, Salsburg, Jorge Rey of Kaufman, Rossin, and Jose Manzur of Doc Solutions. And really, I'll just put the high-level piece out there. And we broke this into two segments: what to do from a standpoint of legal and how to better protect yourself, and then the follow-up piece of how to protect yourself and go through how to go out there and train your employees, what firms like Kaufman Rossman are doing out in the community. Because in reality, ransomware and cyber awareness, we can talk about for days on this stuff. So for those of you that don't know, ransomware is one of the worst type of infiltrations that we've seen. One day you're opening up Word files and you're doing your work. The next day you click on it and sometimes black or red screen comes up telling you that we've held your data hostage. And it doesn't make a difference if you're the single practitioner working out of your home, or in recent weeks, Broward County Public Schools. I think I've looked at some of the articles that were out on Broward County Public Schools, and they got held ransom for $40 million. I remember seeing the chat back and forth thinking that the IT or the chancellor at that point said, did they add too many digits to that? We've seen University of Miami. Recently, we've seen cyber breaches in companies as recent as Geico and Experian again, famous ones like Target and Home Depot. So the piece that we'll talk about mainly is what to do if and when. And I always do say, no matter what, you have to consult a professional. Whether it's an IT professional, we have some distinguished lawyers on there, financial professionals. You can't tackle this on your own. And the threats turn out from a violation all the way out to extortion. And in the case of Broward County Public Schools, a ton of public data was just put out there. And again, none of us want that data that's in place there. But of course, as Franklin and team will tell you, we don't want you to have to pay the ransom either. So with that, I'm going to turn the first portion over to Franklin and Steve. If you guys have questions, we'll have a Q&A session at the first break in between. But Franklin, I'll leave you to go out there and do your introduction.
Thanks so much, Michael. That was really great. I'm Franklin Zemel. I'm a partner in the Fort Lauderdale office of Saul, Ewing, Arnstein, and Lehr. I am certified in information privacy professional. Steve Teppler, my partner in crime. We've lectured together over the last decade or so on a number of different issues, and Stephen is exceptionally talented in this particular area as well. So what we're going to do is Steve and I we're gonna sort of chat a little bit to frame the issue. And so Steve, why don't you first introduce yourself?
Well, thanks, and thanks for inviting me, and the check's in the mail, Franklin, for the kind words. I chair the cybersecurity and privacy practice at my firm, and I've been involved in this space for between this and electronic discovery, probably for about 18, 19 years. I'm really aging myself at this point. but I'm also a certified data privacy solutions engineer, or CDPSC, depending upon how quickly you want to speak the term. I get involved with both pre and post remediation data breach issues, and advising basically people how to avoid liability for for the train that's coming down the track. So it's and instead of becoming better, it's kind of becoming worse and worse every year. So with that,
So let's talk about that train. I think people don't recognize it's coming. So 20 years ago, what was our most valued possession? Your wallet, credit cards. Technology has moved so fast that what is our most valuable possession that we all have today? And Steve, that's our information, isn't it?
yeah. The way that you have to look at it, and even back then, information was your biggest asset. Only the information was conveyed on paper. Your gasoline would turn to shellac in the tanks, and your grain would rot in the silos, unless you had a way of making them go from harvest to storage to wholesaler to retailer, and all that had to do with conveying information. Except now we do it digitally, and so our asset information is really our most valuable asset.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things I think a lot of people don't seem to understand is that while a couple years ago ransomware only impacted the biggest of the big companies, with the advent of Bitcoin, which we're going to talk about, which allows the bad actors to be paid in an absolutely confidential way that cannot be traced. They've opened it up, and it's become a global business to impact as many people as possible. So imagine, as an example, first, as Michael talked about, you come into work and you find not just your individual computer, but your entire network system completely shut down. Think about how that would impact your business. So you're going to say, well, no big deal. I'll just go to my backups. Well, guess what? By the time you realize that you've been hacked, they've been inside your system for weeks. They've identified your most valuable information. They've infected your backups as well. And so when they push the button to encrypt your most important data, they take your backups too. Isn't that right, Steve?
That is correct. And there are methodologies that you can employ to help minimize that effect. And we can go into what kinds of backups and frequency, but pretty much if your active data has been infected and you back up that data, your backup is going to be infected. So the question is, not only do you have to worry about what you back up, but even if you have a good backup, how far back do you have to go before you get to that good backup? How much information do you lose? Do you lose a day, a week, a month? And you have to think about this ahead. And if you don't think about it ahead, you run the risk, as Franklin says, of being totally locked out of your system and unable to conduct business.
And if that wasn't scary enough, the new trend in ransomware, it used to be called infiltration. This is when they get into your system. But the new trend is now exfiltration. And we're going to talk about that. So what happens if you don't pay the ransom? Well, we're going to talk about how they take your data and they just leak it online. Or they call your customer, they contact your own customers and say, hey, did you know that so-and-so isn't paying a ransom, and if they don't pay it, we're going to release all of your information publicly online. So it's and so that itself raises issues of your company getting sued in a mass class action suit. Steve, you want to talk about the potential of the latest Florida's new statute that's likely to be signed by the governor shortly?
Florida has a new private right of action. Right. Well, look, there may or may not be a private right of action, but creative lawyers will find a way to hook a private right of action into this new data security law, which will require companies to protect their information, personal information, meaning personally identifiable information, personal health information, credit card or payment card information. And then there's this very, very strange definition of what personal information is. And it's basically any two pieces of information roughly that could be used to associate that with a person. And once you have that, cow's out of the barn. And how many pieces of information between email and your memos and your receipts and your records have all of this information. And once you look at that, the likelihood of being sued once that information is out is very, very high.
And so the House and Senate have each approved bills. They are substantially similar. They're in reconciliation today. Today is the last day of the session. Yay. Because if they're not in session, they can't hurt us, which is what my father always used to say. Thank God they're only in session for 60 days. They do enough damage in that period of time. But this is an important act, and if they can get it together, they will get this done today, and the governor will sign it. Okay, so let's turn towards ransomware. So we have a good framework now for what it is that we're talking about. So, okay, so let's just start. Wait. It says it's working, but now it's not. So hold on one sec.
The wonders of tech.
Okay, there it is. Okay, so what is ransomware? So ransomware, it's malicious code. It's sometimes not even an entire program. It's just a little bit of code, but it usually has a really cute or friendly name, and that infects your particular device or entire computer systems. And so, as we mentioned, once you're infected, your device can be entirely locked up. Your entire system is locked up. It spreads to your backups. And as we talked about, the recent trends point towards data theft. They now can take your data and sell it on the black market to various data brokers. Once you've been infected, you typically are going to get something that looks like this. Now, this is really sort of interesting. It begins with, oops, your files have been encrypted. I mean, they're really polite. And you see where it says, can I recover my files? It says, sure, we guarantee that you can recover all of your files safely and easily. And it says you can even decrypt some of your files for free. And they tell you how to pay, and they give you a clock. And the bottom line is, they know there's nothing that you can do to them. Nothing. Okay? You can't chase them down. You can't find them. This is it. So they have all the confidence in the world that you can't do anything to them. And it's real simple. Either you pay them in Bitcoin or lose your data. It's that simple. And they're very nice about it. And actually, I mean, Steve, I mean, if you had examples when after it's been paid, they're very helpful. They'll tell you about all the other vulnerabilities they found in your system that you should fix, right?
Actually, we had one client who was affected by ransomware, and he paid the ransom for what he thought was most of his files, but he actually was hit twice. So they reminded him that he actually was hit twice and had to pay 2 ransoms to get his information back. And by the way, he had backups. He was sure he had backups. Problem with him is that he hadn't checked to make sure that his backups were recoverable. And because they weren't recoverable and it was a key client that he was dealing with, he had to pay the ransom.
So some of the more famous examples of ransomware, you may have heard about WannaCry. WannaCry mainly attacked hospitals, and that's pretty serious when all of a sudden your healthcare professionals can't access a patient's records, or you're right in the middle of surgery and all of a sudden the computers go out and you don't know what this person's allergies are or anything else. Bad Rabbit. Bad Rabbit is a drive-by attack. This means is that when you go to a legitimate website that itself has been attacked, you're going to get this. So even if you're very careful and you're very hygienic on the links that you click in emails, you can still get it. Jigsaw is really kind of my favorite, right? Jigsaw got its name. Anybody ever saw the movies, the Saw series? Dreadfully awful graphic films. So it got its name from the puppet, which you see there. And gradually, Jigsaw gradually deletes your files every hour until the demand is paid. And he laughs all the time while your data is being deleted. And so that one's not as cute and fuzzy, but this is the way they go. Petya doesn't bother to encrypt certain of your most valuable files. This just takes everything. The Petya was spread through HR departments. So someone would submit a job application with a link, and they would click the link and boom. So if your HR computer system is on the same system as all of your client files and everything else, you've lost it all. Okay. GanCrab, I'm sure doesn't scare anybody on this session whatsoever. But for other people, it's scary because it threatens to reveal the victim's porn watching habits. Okay, so Steve, why don't you tell us what is the most likely ways that people are getting infected? Steve, you're on mute.
Just didn't want background noise to come in. Usually it is by way of what's called a phish or a phishing campaign, where either an email will be sent to someone in your company who will have been thoroughly vetted by these we call them threat actors. And they'll do their research. They'll look your company up. They'll find out who your reports are. They'll find out about somebody's schedule, and then they'll come in and they'll either send an invoice that says, click this invoice, you're 90 days overdue, or they'll tell you to do something or click a link, and inevitably in the course of our day, everybody clicks, without thinking about it, and bang. Once that happens, there will be ransomware comes in the two-step process. The first process is getting in, and there's this kind of a transport mechanism which invades your system, and then it launches what's called the payload, which is the ransomware, which then basically goes through your entire system and encrypts it. But it's usually an email. It may be a link, but in all likelihood, it will be an email.
So somebody could get an email. So if the president of the company is John Smith, staff may get an email from John Smith, and the email address may be exactly the same as the company email address and just be off by a letter. In fact, it could put a European letter in to substitute over one, so it looks exactly the same, and you open it and boom, you've been nailed, which is why I think so many people are seeing emails that say that this email comes from outside our organization. That's to help people against clicking on these.
Why you see external. It's why you see external in many Microsoft Office emails, because if it comes from outside your organization, it will automatically say it. Although I just read about an exploit that defeats that fairly easily, which is pretty alarming.
It's an arms race to catch up and stay ahead.
That's
so,
right.
So Steve, so maybe it would be helpful to give us some examples of how ransomware has impacted manufacturing, retail, and supply chain businesses.
So with manufacturing, if Merck was hit with ransomware about 2.5 years ago, and it took them 9 months to fully recover. The only reason they didn't totally go dark is because of a problem which turned out to be a blessing, because somebody wasn't online at the time and managed to keep some very critical entire Merck network files away from the ransomware. Cost them close to $900 million to recover. They're now suing about 8 insurance companies. But think about this: if you interrupt your supply chain, and that's what we're talking about between manufacturing and retail, You're basically removing the ability to move products and services through the economy. Once you do that, you can imagine the ripple effect for if you can't get your pharmaceuticals out there, you can't get your medical equipment, you can't get the tires that you need to build your cars or repair your cars, you can't get your electronics chips to your electronics manufacturers. You're talking about integral parts of your of the economy that would be hugely affected by this. And that's not even mentioning infrastructure, where if your power goes out, if your water or sewer system also gets hacked, may also pose real problems.
Yeah, and in fact, Steve, just last month there was a water treatment plant near Tampa that found themselves being hacked, and in fact, bad actors were attempting to poison the water supply of that entire town.
I'm 3 miles away from there right now because I'm in trial, and I can look over the bay and see where those where that phosphate pit was. Yep.
Okay, so I think we've talked about hospitals, and I know Michael talked about schools that are also subject to these ransomware attacks. And by the way, hospitals and schools are soft targets because they are the least likely targets to have the budgets to properly build a security information protective zone around them. So they're really susceptible to that. Let me talk about law firms and accounting firms briefly. Law firms and accounting firms present something very unique in the ransom world era. So here's where we are. So if you're in retail or manufacturing and you get hit by a ransomware attack, okay, so your business is shut down. Law firms and accounting firms have the same problem. They're shut down, okay? What's different is that if law firms and accounting firms don't pay the ransom, third parties get hurt. That means clients of law firms and accounting firms, their most sensitive data is going to get leaked online. And in fact, there's one lawsuit that's already pending against a major national firm who got hacked, and the data of the client was released publicly. Another concern for law firms and accounting firms is even if you pay the ransom, that it doesn't prevent the data from being sold on the black market to others who will then in turn ransom the data against your clients. So this is something that impacts not only the law firms and the accounting firms, but it impacts all of their clients at the same time. So that's a real concern. Stephen, have you run into law firms? Very few law firms and accounting firms are going to admit that it's happened to them. Have you had anyone actually admit it yet?
Yes, on a number of occasions, I will get the call. I'm also the general counsel for a cybersecurity forensics firm, and I will typically get referred. We have a problem. There's this law firm that was hacked. There's some very large law firms that have had problems, and one of the issues is that if you know you're opening yourself up for an easy class action, and my past includes acting as plaintiff's counsel in some very, very large class actions against Facebook and Amazon. And I will tell you that creative plaintiff's lawyers will be able to fashion a complaint basically for negligence or some other cause of action. But the basis will be that if you don't take commercially reasonable steps to protect your information, which not only includes having technology, but having the appropriate personnel and policies in place to be able to mitigate and show that at least you did have something to show, you're opening yourself up again for liability.
All right, so everybody is now saying to themselves, well, if I ever get hit with a ransomware attack, I'm just going to pay the ransom. All right, that's what everybody is saying. I'm just going to pay it, I'll bite the bullet and be done. So a couple of questions that relate to that, right? First is, how much do I have to pay? And the answer is that these are very sophisticated attackers. If you're a public company, they have your financials and they'll charge you a percentage of your revenue. That's one way to do it. Sometimes they don't really understand, like hitting up Broward County Public School System for $40 million. very difficult for the bad actors to recognize that the schools don't have any money. They don't have the ability to pay anything. So you have that issue. Steve, what's your experience with the use of hostage negotiators? Are they worth it?
The hostage negotiators, if they are reputable firms like cyber forensics firms, can help, because you don't want to go in and speak to somebody on the dark web. It is not, very much not recommended. One thing that I think we should add to this is that many organizations, many companies are now looking to cyber insurance, which which in all likelihood at this point at least will cover a ransomware attack. But that said, that doesn't really answer the question of how to prevent and how to make sure it doesn't happen again. But these insurance companies will have they'll have panel cyber forensic investigators who usually wear a dual hat and can act as hostage. They call it negotiators. They sometimes can even bargain down a little bit, but these threat actors do their homework. They know what you can afford, and they're going to demand it.
And they've been inside your system for a long time. There's no way to fool them because they're very sophisticated and they know what you've got.
Yep.
The biggest question, of course, is will my data actually be released if I pay? And this is really sort of interesting. The entire sub-economy of ransomware depends upon trust. And I know that sounds odd, but it depends on trust, because if people have high confidence value that if you pay, your data is going to be released, people are more likely to pay. And in fact, far more likely than not, the data is immediately released. Okay? So that sounds like the perfect situation, right? Just, I can't have my business shut down. I can't have my data being leaked. I don't want to get sued in a class action suit. I'd rather just pay the Bitcoin, get my data back, and move on. So the next question is, well, do I violate U.S. law if I pay? And this, unhappily, the U.S. federal government weighed in on this about 9 months ago, and they reminded us that, yeah, if you pay money to an actor on the U.S. Restricted list, you can in fact expect to get a visit from the guys with the shiny badges. Steve, what's your experience with that?
We're very, very sensitive to that, and there are ways to determine whether or not the payee who you're going to be paying is or is likely not to be on it. There's always a risk, and you have to keep that in mind. The government's realized that payments are being made. It's not that they're ignorant about that. One point going back to will your data actually be released if you pay brings up two other issues. One is if the encryption of your data was done badly, you may not be able to get your data back. Encryption sometimes will corrupt data. Number two is even if you do get your data back, how will you know that it might not have been changed before it was encrypted? And some hostage, some threat actors will actually say, we've changed one file, and we're not going to tell you what it is until you let us know. But again, you can have your data, you can get your data released. There's always a risk that even if you do get the decryption key to unlock the data, that your data may not actually decrypt.
So this again, this is what we've talked about earlier. I don't want to repeat this because we want to move along. But if you're thinking about not paying the ransom, or what if you can't pay it because it would violate federal law? Again, that puts law firms, accounting firms, hospitals in particular, in a very, very tough position. And so,
high risk.
So the best thing, obviously, is not to be in that position in the first place. So the question here, Stephen, is can insurance help?
Insurance can help. Insurance, like data breach insurance, ransomware insurance used to be cheap. It's now 40-page addendums to your normal D&O insurance. And they are now requiring, in many instances, that you fill out a checkbox list of items that say that you now have commercially reasonable security. Because if they don't, if you say that you do and you don't, rather, and then you get hit with a ransomware attack, they may deny coverage for that. There was also an issue for a long time. You have to read your cyber insurance policies very carefully also, because some insurance companies, especially those that were hit, those companies like Merck or Mondelez, who had billion-dollar losses and tried to file claims with their insurance companies, the insurance companies invoked their terrorism and warfare exclusion, because they said that terrorism includes cyber terrorism, and now you have to make sure that your policies make sure to exclude the exception for cyber terrorism in terms of coverage. It can get very, very, very involved, and it needs you need to have insurance. You need to have it reviewed.
And so our message here really is don't go it alone. If you pick up the phone and you call your lawyer after you've been hit, it's way too late. It's just too late at that point. So what Steve and I do is we assist clients up front to review their systems, make sure that you've done the things that you need to do, make sure that data's been segregated so that if one part of your system gets hit, not everything gets hit. There's a lot to it. We can help with the insurance as well, as Steve mentioned, and so that's our view, which is prevention. But if you get hit, you need lawyers who know what they're doing. So Michael, I think I think this is a good place for us to pause to take questions, but then turn it over to the other speakers today to talk about prevention and the actual methods of doing that.
I agree. And I know that you had a list of companies, but the other list of organizations and businesses that are very vulnerable are the municipalities. Small cities that are out there are also high on the list that have issues, but Homeland Security has offered out to some small cities, if any of you are working with them, services to come out and evaluate. But we do have one question that's in the chat, and this is from Janet. Thank you. As a small business owner, what can I do besides not clicking on links or going to strange websites? And second part of that is, what is it going to cost me to be, in quotes, be protected?
Well, I think the answer is most law firms, and I can't speak for Stephen, but I know that we do this as well, is we come in and we will evaluate your overall system and score it for you in terms of security and issues, and that initial workup is complimentary, just so that we can give you an idea of where you are. But the fact is that most companies collect data. They don't even know what they have. They don't even know the data that they have in their inventory. They could have data that's so old they don't even need it anymore, but it's valuable to hackers. Being able to, if one email user is a receptionist and the receptionist clicks on something, why should the receptionist be able to shut down your entire system? So there's levels of being able to do that and ways to segregate data. Steve?
We pretty much do the same. We have the same approach as Franklin's firm, and that's why Franklin and I are presenting together, because we present pretty much a united block on this. We will always provide a client with a free consultation to find out what it is from a top level, what they have. Something as simple as, do you have a policy? Do you have backups? Where are your backups? What do you do? Do you have a disaster recovery policy, a business continuity policy? Do you have a cybersecurity policy? Some of these can be wrapped into one policy depending upon the size of the firm. And they're not as expensive as you might think, because the smaller the operation, typically the less involved it will be. There are certain baselines that you'll need for for protection, such as spam filters, and there are services such as the ones that I believe Michael's company can provide that can overlay what a small business can do. But you really have to understand that what do you do when something happens? Who do you call? What do you do? What are your next steps, right? It's about preparedness, and in the end, it's not about ultimately preventing everything, because you can't prevent everything, and you likely won't be able to. The idea is, how would you mitigate what you think are your biggest threats? And once you're there, you'll never be completely safe. You're never completely safe crossing the street, but you will take the appropriate step to make sure that you are.
But please, 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 when you have your data disaster plan in place and you've taken all of these steps, would you please print it out on paper? Okay, because recently we read about a company who paid a fortune for their disaster recovery plan. They had everything all set up, but it didn't dawn on them when they got hit that they wouldn't be able to access it or print anything. So print it on ancient paper. I know it's arcane, okay, but it needs to be printed in paper and put someplace safe. Okay, Michael, so that's it for us.
Know where you put it. So with that, we're going to transition over to Jorge Rey and Jose Manzur. So George, I think we set the perfect stage for you guys to go out there and talk about what you can do for prevention techniques. Mute. See, I should have a way to unmute everybody.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for that, Michael. And can you guys see my screen? Just want to confirm that.
It looks good.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Franklin. Thank you, Steven. I think that was a great presentation. Actually, it takes a little bit about ransomware. I'm Jorge Rey. I'm with Kaufman Rossin. I've been with Kaufman Rossin for 14 years. And pretty much I head up our cybersecurity consulting division. And in addition to that, I'm in charge of our information security program. We consult with financial services, healthcare companies, whether small to large, and we have clients in California, New York, Texas, South Florida, and South America. And we do provide some guidance on to our clients on how they can actually prevent ransomware. Here, we're not going to talk about what do you do after the fact, but what are the couple things you can do to minimize the likelihood of a ransomware attack affecting you. So So ultimately, the biggest issue that we're looking at is how is ransomware being delivered to your network? It is pretty much four ways. One, it is through some type of vulnerability in your network or your external network. Some companies, depending on the size, they might have what's called external public network in addition to the internal network. So if that's the case, then that is a potential vector for them. Second one goes back to phishing, and I think we've heard that many times. Every time we get a piece of link or a piece of document that is attached to an email that has malware, will be downloaded into your computer, and the malware will be executed. Third, go through malware infection, and then it comes down to whether it's through a Word document that was given to you through a thumb drive, where there's a Word document or PDF that was downloaded through a SharePoint inside. That's how it will be ultimately obtained. And finally, depending on where your data is, and I think all business right now cannot consider doing business without having different third parties or cloud services in which your data is. So if those service providers do not have the right security in mind and the right security protocols, your data will be affected. So ultimately, those are the four main methods in which ransomware will be delivered to you guys. So now we're going to be talking about, hey, what can you do in each of those sections? So first one, ultimately, you got to be being able to identify what vulnerabilities are within your network, right? So there's different techniques that you can perform. You can do this in-house, or you can have a third party do it, but it is running vulnerability scanners. Vulnerability scanners are a piece of software that actually goes into your network, into your computers, into your devices, and will perform some checks to see, hey, how old is this piece of software that you have, and is that software vulnerable to a potential attack? So it is very important for you guys to have some type of vulnerability assessment within your environment. That helps you identify what are the potential devices, computers, servers that could be potentially used for ransomware spreading. 2, you can do the vulnerability scan, but if you look at the results of those reports, but you actually don't update your software or you don't patch your software, ultimately you will be leaving that whole section completely open. So if you're not going to do vulnerability scanning, make sure that you're patching and updating your software once your vendor is telling you, or once you feel is the right moment for you guys to do it. I know Microsoft performs the patch updates, I think it's every Tuesday. It used to be like that. So make sure you're ultimately updating and patching your servers. So if the best way to minimize any spread of ransomware through a vulnerability misconfiguration, patch and update. And I think going back to one of the questions that we heard before, this is not expensive. This is part of something you already paid. So it's just making sure that your IT group knows that they need to do this, and you're just making sure that that occurs. And there's other points there that are a little more technical, but we don't need to get into the technicality there. But ultimately, ransomware can be delivered through different methods. So ultimately, you want to just make sure that when you're configuring your network and your IT group understands that, make sure that they're making some basic configuration changes that will minimize or eliminate the ransomware's ability to propagate. Now, when we think about phishing and going back to, hey, how does it work and why are we having the issues that we're having? It's pretty much because we're getting a lot of emails or spam that will have a piece of document making us believe it's a real document or a piece of link that is valid. So there's a couple of things you can do, and one is, hey, you want to enhance your content filtering. Depending on the type of email provider that you have, if it's Office 365, if it's Gmail, or if you have your own Exchange server in your company, make sure that you have a very robust content filtering that actually is constantly being updated on a periodic basis with different signatures that helps you identify and prevent ransomware and prevent any type of phishing-related emails. 2, it is very important, and we do this quite often for our clients, is phishing simulation awareness training. What does that mean? It is, we're training our folks, and we do this internally for us, and we do this for our clients. We have like larger hospitals in Texas that actually use this service. On a periodic basis, we send a fake phishing email in which we're sending that email to the companies. And if people don't recognize the phishing email, they'll click on it or download the attachment, and then they'll be sent immediately to a quick training on how to recognize that phishing email. So this is training on the job, but it's primarily focusing on helping people identify and minimize the likelihood of someone clicking on a link. So at a high level, those are the two main areas is phishing simulation training. You can tell people that, hey, phishings are coming in and remind them on a weekly basis, but developing that skill set is very important. Making sure that you have the right filters and the right technology to prevent phishing email coming in into it. All of this should be based on your risk. Like accounting firms and law firms, our goal is to make sure that our emails are being out there and people can have access to us. So we have a higher risk of phishing. And because of that, we have different type of technologies that actually is preventing from phishing on coming in. And finally, there's different things that you should be doing to your email setup, going back to configuration. There's SPKF or DMARC. All of these are like new techniques and new configurations that actually help your email systems to minimize from being compromised. Now, when we go back to malware infections and the business associates or third-party managed services providers would be, hey, you want to make sure that you have a decent antivirus deployed in your computers. Antivirus is something that we've been performing audit for the past 10 or 15 years. And you'll be shocked that every time we're doing an audit on clients, we constantly continue to identify that devices don't have anti-malware updated or downloaded and installed in the servers. Sometimes you need to do that by design, other times it's by mistakes. Going back to why do we have erasers and pencils? Because we make mistakes. So we make mistakes when we're deploying this technology. So it's very important to make sure that basic technology, basic security like antivirus and malware, have they be properly deployed? Do you have the right spyware on your browsers? Or if you have a bigger budget, you have systems like an intrusion detection system who's actually monitoring your traffic coming in and coming out, and actually helps you prevent malware. But like everything, this is a risk management decision. It's not about spending all your profits on prevention of ransomware, but making sure that you're doing the right balance based on your risk. Finally, when we're thinking about third-party providers, it's just asking them who has access to their data, what type of security they have in place. Just because third parties, they might be better at securing the data than you are, doesn't mean that you're not responsible for making sure that they're doing it. So there's different techniques that we have, or you can have in place to make sure that that's happening. But it is as simple as asking a question: what are you doing, and how are you preventing your network and your computers from prevention of ransomware? And this is my takeaway. So before we move into the next speaker, but there's really 5 things that you guys should be taking away from today's presentation as relates to me. And it goes back to first one: make sure you have offline backup. Okay, that's it. Offline means that you perform a backup, and then that backup actually was sent to an offline from your network. If you don't do that, your chances of being compromised by ransomware will be really high. So that to me is recommendation number 1. Make sure that you have a basic understanding of incident response. It is what happens when ransomware occurs, what do you have to do, who do you need to call, what's the process you got to follow. Make sure that you always updating and patching all your computers. It is critical. Please, if you don't have MFA, you have not deployed MFL, which is multi-factor authentication, you get your user ID, password, and the third piece of information. Please start making that as a habit. We get a lot of clients and prospects with the webmail being hacked and being used to deliver ransomware. So, and it could have been very easily just by having multi-factor authentication on your webmail account. So please, look, I know it's painful, it makes your life a little more difficult, but in the long run will save you time and a headache. And finally, as it relates to access, make sure that the people who need access to your data is being reviewed. Sometimes we tend to give too much access to people within the network. So you just want to make sure that only the right people have access to it. The reason why is because like if the receptionist doesn't need to have access to the financial information, if her computer gets compromised, the financial information will not get compromised potentially. So make sure that you review access within your network to make sure that you can restrict the propagation of ransomware through that. And all of these are not expensive. All of these is probably things you're already doing. It's just changing your focus and putting more time into focusing on this area. And saying that.
Well, George, that was great. And I think that one of the things that some of this might be super technical, but the summary of all these things from a perspective of this is, I usually say, you got to know who has access to what and figure out, like I think you said earlier, the lowest person on the totem pole doesn't need to have access to everything that's on the network on it. So I'm going to close out, and then we'll take a couple of questions with Jose. I know, Jose, you offer a very unique solution that might be the reverse of ransomware, of encrypting for the good some of the good files that are out there and protecting that data.
Yes, absolutely. We'll go ahead and see. There is a question here. It says, how important is the VPN and how does it restrict the various websites? So I don't know if you want to take that, Michael.
So VPN, so virtual private network. So basically, in a nutshell, that really encrypts your data so that when you're outside the office, so the bad guys that are listening in will less likely be able to give you, gather your information. But that's just connectivity out there. And services, I always say what I use, but I'm on an AT&T service, and part of my monthly plan includes all my data being on a VPN. So VPN is just another layer of protection to go out there and protect you, whether you're surfing the internet or, more importantly, if you are connecting into a corporate network or another machine. And if you have other questions, keep them coming in while we have all these experts on the line.
Yeah, if it's okay, I'll go ahead and start.
Yep.
Michael, okay, great. I'm going to skip through because we're probably a little short on time if we're going to leave any time at the end for questions. But real quick, there are quite a few slides that I have that are identical in nature to the speakers you've heard before. But we talk about what is cybersecurity, firewalls, endpoint protection, all the technologies that are used to protect your document from the people you want to get in, right? So what happens is some of those people that you trust are then going to allow other people to get in. So we want to start to address, those type of things and preventive measures, in doing so. So as I mentioned, I'm going to see, some of the things that we often forget when we talk about technologies is that, once a document is accessed or downloaded, you're kind of granting that user access forever. So even if you pay the ransomware, they're going to continue to have copies of your documents. So things like terminated employees, all those documents that are produced are out there and shared. They're shared forever. And you have to think about that in your strategies. This is probably a no-brainer. Why do we protect documents? There's data on documents, and it contains things that are valuable to us or damaging to us, right? Either one. I guess damaging would also be valuable, but we need to make sure that the documents that are being put out there contain as little damaging or sensitive information as possible. So you start from the beginning. Like George, we talk about preventing from the beginning. So as you generate content, here are the culprits. Web downloads, cloud storage, it's email attachments, network shares, electronic document management, SharePoint, USB drives. These are the locations where our files exist. So these are the endpoints that need to be secured. But again, when you have a trusted employee, a trusted resource that has access to these, if they don't practice good hygiene, you're at risk. Again, I'm going to just spend 30 seconds on this, but here are the things we hear about. WikiLeaks could have been prevented if those documents were not able to be opened outside of the military establishment. We actually do have corporate espionage and spying that still goes on. It's not just in the movies. You have documents that are no longer under your control, local documents. I know that there are contracts during the negotiation that are shared and distributed, and there are third parties that have copies of these documents. And after the negotiations are over, they still have copies of those documents in their possession. And of course, I'm repeating some of the things you've already heard, but what is our weakest link? Our weakest link are our users. It's just a little bit of bad hygiene, not using two-factor authentication, using similar passwords for multiple accounts, the ever forgiving reply all or unforgiving reply all, or forwarding an email messages. So often I'll hear someone say, well, I'll just forward that to myself and then save it and then forward it to somebody else. We use that even as a means to get around limitations, because in the context that I heard, it was because of a file size limitation. Somebody was saying, well, my file's over 5 gigs. The email system doesn't let me send a file this big, so I'm going to send it to myself, via to my personal account. And of course, public storage locations, Dropbox, Drive, etc. So your strategy must also include the documents, because that's, again, my area of specialty. Some of the most recent ransomware attacks now include document exposure. So you're not just being told, hey, I've encrypted your documents, but they've also, as mentioned previously, have been looking at your data, have been looking at your documents, they've been reading those documents. And I know for a fact, the Baltimore incident, they sent them redacted documents saying, hey, we have copies of this. If you don't pay, we're also going to release this to the public. Just like the Broward County schools. Not only are we holding your data hostage, we're also going to release student or parent records if you don't, so the data itself is also, being leveraged to force people to pay. So, the bottom line is that last line here, keep your backup files isolated, because you might get hit. Even if everyone implements the technologies, or you had unlimited budget for the protection technologies, that one, user that inadvertently, clicked the link, just crumbles it all down to the ground. Again, what can you do? You've heard this before: minimize access to sensitive data without challenge. So when ransomware attacks a user, anything that user has access to from that computer is vulnerable. So if you have a network drive, and on that network drive was also your backups, well, that user has access to your backup files. So that's why you can't restore them. If even if they can't read files, if they have a drive letter that is exposed, it's a drive letter exposure to sensitive data, it's vulnerable. Anything on their local computer is vulnerable. Anything that user can access on cloud storage is vulnerable. And then so you have to protect the documents when you generate them. So when you have let's say you have a CRM, and in that CRM you have sensitive customer information, look at the output. If you generate contracts from there, if you generate letters from your CRM, when that content is generated, you have to consider a strategy to encrypt it. And as Michael, said before, I'm using the similar technology as the ransomware attackers, but in reverse, meaning I'm encouraging, and I've developed solutions and services to help you encrypt your data so that no one else can get to it. So even if they can get to the files per se, your document can't be opened. It makes it much more difficult, almost impossible for them to read it, print it, send it back to you, and threaten to expose it, because it cannot be opened without the challenges that we put into place. So
Jose, it's always tough being the cleanup batter, but I want to be cautious of people's time. I just want to see if there's a question, and if not, I'll let you go out there and continue.
Absolutely.
I think there is a question up there from Denise Jordan, Michael.
So Denise is looking for what's the difference in VPN. And I guess in the tech terms, I think that when you go in, just like driving a car, you're going to have different types of VPNs that are in place there. A little too technical, I think. If you want a VPN of any flavor is better than no VPN. And I do say that, it's as simple as even turning something on your phone or your laptop. And of course, pay for something if you're going to use something, because I'm not a big fan at all, and I'm sure any one of our experts will say the same thing. Free doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting any better protection than using nothing. Anyone else want to jump in on that point? And I do want to emphasize any more questions, and then if there's questions out there, Jose, I'll give you the opportunity to close it out.
Okay. I don't see any more, and I haven't heard anyone. Let's see if I can, you know what, I think I went ahead and skipped through a lot, just, in respecting everyone's time. But the bottom line is that documents are containers of data, and we often put sensitive data on documents, and they're the highest risk exposure to data because we're sending documents out. Consider a strategy so that when you generate documents that could contain, so if you're generating contracts, if you're generating client lists, if you're doing anything of that could cost you, if you're producing manuals that you charge for, which would, if you're printing or generating documents for review, we had a telecom company as a customer that was sending their engineering documents to India for work, for edits and modifications. And of course, they were worried that those documents would get redistributed. So they used our technology to share those PDF documents. And as soon as the project was over, they were able to kill those documents and not worry about them being distributed otherwise, you know, and things like that. So, here are some of the advantages of these types of solution of digital rights management. That is encrypting a document prior to distribution or even prior to storage in network libraries. Full audit trail and reporting and access logs, so you know who has opened the document, where and when. It's real time. We can watermark, so we can put identifiable information in case they want to take pictures on screen. And it can even, we can time bomb the document, meaning the document can work for 30 days. The old Mission Impossible, instead of the tape burning up, a PDF document can stop working after 30 days. And then again, similar device limitations as you get with books and audio files, where you can limit how many devices a user can open a document, or even how many times it can be opened. And then functional restrictions include print, copy, edit, and save. So. Let's see, biggest takeaways. Yep, have a plan, consult a professional, of course. And and similar, we offer free consultations. We evaluate some of the systems, and we look at ways to integrate so that it's not up to the end user to make a decision whether this is confidential or not, meaning it's going to be set up based on rules. And regardless of whether that user thinks it's confidential or not, it will be protected if they mistakenly or on purpose share that information.
And that's an important point, because I think that, in summary of all of this, all of us, including our end users, are the weakest link in the chain. And if we can put tools in place to help automate those processes and protect ourselves from ourselves, I think that's the biggest piece that's there. So I will open up. First of all, I do want to thank all of our panelists out there. You guys, being an IT professional myself, I learned a lot on some of those things, Steve and Franklin and George, they're in place there. And of course, Jose, we talk all the time. We could have planned this to be a whole day kind of event. This is, I remember, when we look at it, it's a change of computer lifestyle that we're being forced into these days. It's not just what can I do today and I'm good for that the rest of the year. In my side of the business, as I'm sure in everything, it's an ever-changing market, and it's a moving target that we're all going out and hitting against. So any other closing remarks from anyone before we close out this hopefully wonderful chamber chat?
Hill Street Blues, be careful out there.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to all of the panelists. George, thank you so much as well. I think Jose, I think your doc solutions, it's something that's a very cool product that I'm giving a lot of thought to. I think it solves a lot of problems. But I did want to address, I think Ms. Jordan had a question. I just wanted to address that. Look, one of the most dangerous hacks so far, in my opinion, of our age is the so-called SolarWinds hack, where the Russians got into almost the entire U.S. federal government databases and hundreds of companies, and they did it by hacking a piece of software that everybody uses. So if you think about using some free service online, that's a no-brainer for a hacker to hack into that so-called free program, whatever it is you're using. They can certainly hack into the most expensive, but for sure it's an easy target. So if you download anything free on the internet, guess what? You ask for what happens when it happens. Just as some like to say, don't do it, man. Don't do it. Just don't do it. All right. Thanks so much, Mike. I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, guys, listen, thank you. From the Tech Council, you'll hopefully see us again in October of putting on a tech event that will most definitely be around cyber awareness and ransomware, and hopefully our extreme panel out there will actually want to come on board and help us in this piece. So again, thank you, everybody. Enjoy your weekend and stay safe.
Thanks, Michael.
Bye.